Joe Biden does seem a nice fellow, nicer than you know who anyway. He's a nice genocider. It's his tradition. He is the son of a genocidal nation and civilization. He is a colleague of its parent, Christian Europe. The American project, as I have watched it closely, is a manic history of conceding and revising history. It tells me, laughably, the project is about freedom, equality, and a democracy, not even a good try. If it were, at the very least, the military would be much smaller. Other countries would say, let's hang with the USA. Then we'll get their freedom, equality, and democracy. It'll rub off. Saudi Arabia does not say this. The propaganda is that the military is to defend ourselves and friends from other cultures who hate freedom, equality, and democracy, like Saudi Arabia. One can unpick this ludicrous notion elsewhere. I will. It is a convenient bit of supremacy to say other peoples don't want freedom, equality, and democracy, and how little we do when they do. And fun to see how little of the three we actually enjoy. The motivation for this level of lying, more cogently the tremendous need to believe the lie, is what I'm having a look at. Even Rome, the founder's model, with its brutal lack of conscience and imperial addictions, was deathly afraid of its slaves. They were empathetic enough to know that Spartacus was coming. The Second Amendment has been shredded and reconstituted, written in code for good reason. It was a response to the enemies within, Africans and native people, our Spartacuses. The Romans had less qualms about their abuses of humanity, possibly because they had not invented their Prince of Peace yet. His inventors themselves uninvented him as quickly as they could. The essential message, the championing of the poor, Christian kings disapproved of and were so soon to exploit with such brutality. The European claim to the Americas and Australia is naught. Zero. No ancestral homeland, dears. The only claim is conquest. No negotiation, assimilation, accommodation, just conquest and colonization, and the genocide that doth follow. Displacing the peoples already here has never even been questioned. Except in the most bizarre quarter, George III, him, forbade the taking of native land. Quote, in response to Pontiac's rebellion, a revolt of Native Americans, King George III declared all lands west of the Appalachian Divide off limits to colonial settlers. Can you imagine? This royal proclamation issued on October the 7th, 1763, closed down colonial expansion westward beyond Appalachia, end quote. This drove Thomas Jefferson into a froth, a righteous froth, an equality froth that was a major motivator of the revolution, the creation of freedom, equality, and democracy, my left ass cheek. I don't know of another civilization that labors so hard under this delusion, so hard under the weight of this kind of guilt. I'm happy to hear about it if you have one. It is the only virtue of Christianity, creating guilt we nevertheless ignore. And what does guilt do to people? It makes them mean. The odd abuser will confess and atone. Not so Europe. German gestures to Judaism are, after getting caught red-handed, was warmly welcomed by Europe and America, partly because they were relieved of responsibility for their own depredations against the Third World. Yeah, who did the Hitler study? We know that. Phew, they said. Germans are the worst, but at least they confessed. Amritsar banished in an instant. The endless capacity to condemn resistances, terrorisms, is a characteristic of pious hypocrites. Like Romans, I suggest, Israel knew it was coming. A big factor in all religions is knowing it's coming, but relying on God's iron dome to prevent it. America has reacted brutally to any hint of African or native resistance. Handing out guns to smiling goons in the West Bank is the current version of the Second Amendment. When Hamilton spoke of fathers, sons, neighbors, and fellow citizens in Federalist 29, he does mean fellow white people. fellow land-owning white people. Insisting Jews have the right to a homeland means they have the right to conquest. Europe knew this. Balfour was English. So they get to be Europe 2.0. Should the real claimants to an ancestral America return and demand restoration, Biden and his bozos would not even blink. They'd arm up. They'd repeat what they did before. Nothing has changed. Without this progressivism, the rest of his look paltry to me. This makes of the United States, in my analogy, Hamas, except it doesn't have to be. It is the empire. It doesn't react, it preempts. Its 400 years of atrocity, murder, and rape is not called terrorism. So, no, Joe, you could have shown me something, but you didn't. If Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent her. You need this myth so desperately to exonerate yourself. This crime, in my mind, is much worse than Trump's crimes, which are, after all, how shall we say, parochial, the small crimes of the average partaker of this culture that piously imagines itself so exceptional, so above reproach. This is what the Democrats condemn, much more significant than thousands of children dying. He's a terrible embarrassment for sure. Joe is the bigger one to me, but you'd need to be not American to see it, I guess. America is not free, equal, or democratic enough to see this. The Kool-Aid is too sweet. Is he a destroyer of democracy? Which democracy? A threatener of freedom and equality? Same question. As Gandhi would say, American democracy sounds like a great idea. Are you going to try it? Just apropos, I started listening to Mehdi Hassan this morning with his new venture on YouTube, and he puts this conundrum about the election. He says, well, you've either got a genocider on the one hand, and then you've got Trump, this awful threat to democracy on the other. And you've only got a two-party system, which is, guess what? One step away from a one-party system. It's not a democracy. It is a one-party anyway. It's just, two different relationships to real estate. Anyway, I'm done.